All right, we are recording for our balance photography project. Bling. All right, so if you go in the instructions, I got the instructions here, decent layout. You can also go to the Google Doc here, where it says Photo 1-2 Balance Photography Project, and you can open that up. So what I was going to do today was a quick demo on how to shoot, just general kind of shooting tips, whether using a camera, a smartphone, or a laptop. Some of you might be taking pictures with a Chromebook. You can do that. I have a link here as well, and I also have a video on how to do it as well. So if you are interested in shooting, you only have a Google Chromebook, I do have a link you can click on, and it goes step by step in how to take a picture with the Chromebook. So if you are interested in that, check out that video. I did have a student last fall that had to take his pictures with his laptop. It's not easy, but it does work. It's basically like the same camera on a smartphone. So first things first, what we're going to be doing is taking pictures of balanced objects. So you're going to be taking 10 total photos. You're going to be shooting 3 photos of each of the type of balance. So we're going to do 3 photos of symmetrical balance, 3 of asymmetrical balance, and 3 of radial balance. So those will be your 9 photos. The 10th photo will be a self-portrait or a selfie of you. And what I'm looking for is trying to put yourself in some maybe nice light, maybe next to like a window when the sun's out and get some nice window light. This helps me see who's actually in my class. So a lot of the times, you guys don't put your videos. I don't know who you guys are, what you look like. So it just kind of helps me see the class. And so that'll be your 10th photo is your self-portrait. So 10 total photos, 3 photos for each type of balance. So 3 symmetrical, 3 asymmetrical, 3 radial, that's 9. And then your 10th photo will be a self-portrait. And typically, I like that one because you guys tend to care more about your self-portrait because you realize like, oh man, someone's gonna be looking at me, so I better find some good lighting or a good background or a good place to shoot, So you tend to care more about your self-portrait. So this will be due next Thursday for 40 points. So you have a full week to do this. I wanted to make sure to give you, class periods. So if you're having issues shooting, like taking your pictures, or with like shooting modes on a camera or focusing, that I can answer those questions in class, like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So maybe you try to shoot this weekend and you had some issues shooting, then I can kind of problem solve those for you. All right, so using different devices, first one I'm going to show you is a camera, right? So this looks very much like a DSLR. DSLR is like a digital single lens reflex. This is called like what is called an all-in-one camera. It looks very similar to it. It's got a grip, it's got a lens, it's got shooting modes and buttons on the top, it's got a screen on the back, a viewfinder is what that is where you look through. And so how this one works is, this is a Sony RX10. This is the 3rd model. They have a 4th model, which is newer. It's actually a much improved version of this camera. But the reason why I like this camera is because it has a extensive zoom range. And so when you turn it on, it's got a power zoom. It goes from 24 millimeters, which is pretty wide angle, and then you can zoom all the way to 600 millimeters. So you can shoot wildlife and things pretty far away from you. The focus isn't super fast when you're all zoomed out, but it does a pretty good job. The 4th version, the newer version of this, is a lot better focus. That's what my wife's mom, she has the 4th version, which is newer, has better autofocus. So just a quick layout feature. You'll have your shutter button on the grip. You'll have exposure dial, a little screen telling you your information on what your shutter speed, ISO, aperture is. This is where you view. You can also shoot through the screen. This is, considered a mirrorless camera. And then we have, the most important part is the shooting mode. So you usually have a dial on the top of a DSLR mirrorless camera where you can change the different shooting modes. If you're brand new to photography, I would put it in the fully automatic mode here. It's basically like a green box on a Canon or on a Nikon. And so that's basically the camera will decide what your ISO, aperture, and shutter speed is going to be for you, depending on what it's seeing. And then it also will determine if it's darker to like put the flash on for you. So it's basically like the fully automatic mode. So this is a good starting point. Otherwise, there are more manual modes on the top dial, like M is for manual, S is for shutter speed. That is TV on Canon, and then aperture priority. And then Sony has something called a scene, where you can tell it which scene you're shooting. So like if you're shooting sports, you can put it in sports scene or a portrait scene, right? And so there's kind of different settings, and you're kind of just helping the camera understand what it's shooting to adjust its settings. Because if you put in like a sports mode, it'll basically tell the camera like, I need a fast shutter speed to freeze fast motion. I need continuous autofocusing, so it keeps focusing and doesn't stop. And then it shoots multiple frames, right? So it changes the settings on the camera, and then it figures out the exposure for you. When I shoot in full manual. So I'm telling the camera, I want, this ISO, this shutter speed, this aperture, and this frame rate, this type of focusing. Like I'm controlling everything, and I'm not letting the camera decide for me. But that is much ahead. So again, put it in the green mode, the full auto mode, if you have a camera. So totally cool if you don't. And then another thing you want to check, so Sony, this one's a little different. The focusing is here. And so you can change it from center focus to basically you can choose where the focal point is, and then to full manual where you can manually focus with a focusing ring. I would start off with autofocus, so that way the camera's helping you focus on something, especially if it's a moving subject. It's really hard to manual focus on it. And then how you take photos with autofocus is the shutter button. So this guy here, this is a dual pressure button. So on any DSLR, you press it halfway to focus it. And when you're looking, you'll see it start to focus. And you'll sometimes hear a beep. So I'm focusing. And then all the way down to take the shot. So I usually focus and then take the shot, right? You can hear it, chunk, chunk, right? It took 2 photos. So that's how shutter works on a camera. Halfway to focus, and so you keep focused till you see it sharp, and then all the way down to take your shot. So that's a general layout for a camera. So if you have a different model, which I guarantee 99% of you do, and you're not quite sure how to use it, what I would recommend is go to YouTube and then just search the camera make model and then either tutorial or user guide. And you'll see videos where professional photographers show you the full layout of the camera, where everything is located, how to go through the menu, how to change the settings and the shooting modes. And so even Jared Pullen, who did that photo challenge, the movie challenge, right, he has a video on how to use the Canon Rebel T6, which is the camera you guys would be using in my classroom. So it goes through all the different buttons and features of it, shows you, where the flash pops up, how to change manual focus, autofocus, how to go through all the shooting modes and settings in your camera. One important thing to think about is the image quality. Let's see if I can get to that. There we go. No, come on, dude. There we go. So if you are shooting on a real camera, make sure the image quality is set to a large JPEG. So that way it's not compressing it. I wouldn't recommend shooting in RAW format. That is an uncompressed format. But the problem with RAW format when you're beginning shooting is it takes up more room on your card and fills up your card quicker. And sorry, I don't know why my sound went down. And then it also, you have to open it into a Camera Raw software that can process it, and then you open it into Photoshop, and then you output it as a JPEG so you can actually upload it to Google Classroom. So I would just keep it in a JPEG format, so that way, and the highest quality. So this is like a high-res large on a Canon. If you've never used a Canon, this is what it looks like. And so that is something I would recommend. So again, depending on your make and model, there's like Panasonic, Fuji, Leica, like all different brands out there. And so I would just search the make, so like Sony, RX10 III tutorial, and there will be videos on how to use it. So that's kind of what I recommend as a good starting point. I also put links in it. So this is tips and tricks for beginners using a Canon DSLR, Canon DSLR button features, Nikon DSLR tutorials, right? So there are other brands out there, but those are kind of the main ones I wanted to cover and find links for. So you could watch those if you are interested. And then that's also why I gave class time for Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, is if you had a question about your specific camera and you had a hard time focusing or hard time changing the shooting modes or making sure you're shooting in JPEG, then I can answer those questions on Tuesday. So you can just put on your camera and show me your actual camera, and then I can help you with those settings next week. So any questions so far? I know it's kind of the basic for shooting with a camera. Next is shooting with a smartphone. So I did put in the instructions and on the Google Doc a link to change so you're in the right format when you're shooting with an iPhone. If you're shooting on an Android, the default should be a JPEG, but you might want to double check your camera settings. So go into your settings, camera, and then make sure the format says JPEG, JPEG. So how you do this on an iPhone, because they changed it, Apple decided to create an HEIC format, which is Apple's own format. It's a high compression format. And basically, it's the quality of a JPEG, but a smaller file size, so they crunched it even more. So if you go into your settings, and then you scroll down to the camera app, not the book app, the camera app, you click on that, you'll see different camera settings for your camera app on your iPhone. Click on the top one, which says Formats. And so you see the two options, high efficiency or most compatible. Make sure the most compatible is checked. That is the JPEG, JPEG format. The high efficiency format, again, is only for Apple products. And when you upload them to Google products, like Google Classroom, right, it has a lot of hard time like recognizing that format. And if you try to upload on a website or on a Flickr, which is a photo community, it won't take the file format. So just make sure when you guys are shooting for your projects, you're in the most compatible format, which is the JPEG format. And if you're using an Android, I would just go through into your camera and go into your settings, camera settings, and then see if there's a format. It should be JPEG. I don't think Android has changed their formats, but it might be in a RAW format. So just make sure it's set to a JPEG format. And then if you're shooting with an iPhone, so I can do this demo, one thing I recommend is if you're using just a standard camera app on the iPhone, which you can, what I recommend is learning how to do the auto exposure lock. It's hard to do, but I'll try to do it. And so what you do is you press and hold, and you'll see that box kind of go chunk, 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 and then you'll see it says AEAF lock on the top. And what that means is it's locking the exposure, so the exposure doesn't change in your scene, and then it's locking the focus. So basically, it's not going to keep hunting for focus. It is locked on where you focus. And so if you need to adjust the focus, you can kind of move in and out, to get the focus perfect. And then another thing is when it's locked, you can swipe up or down. Let's see if I can do this way. There we go. So I'm just going to press and hold here on the cabinet, and then if you swipe up or down, you can change the brightness and the exposure. So if it's like doing the wrong exposure, just do your AEAF lock, press and hold, and get the two boxes that kind of bounce, and then you can swipe up or down next to that box, and you can change the exposure manually, which gives you more control. I did share like the ProCam app before. That one costs, $7.99 for a one-time purchase, and unless you really control the smartphone camera. But right now, if I'm just using the standard camera app, that's what I would kind of do when I'm taking my photos. And then lastly, if you're shooting with a Chromebook, I do have a link here. So if you're using basically the web camera on the Chromebook, this will give you directions on how to take a photo or video. And so I would just select the photo when you go into the Open Camera app in the launcher. So that's kind of the main way of doing it. There's also an interactive tutorial here on how to do it as well. And as I mentioned before, there is a video here where someone on YouTube shows you how to use it, how to take a photo with the Chromebook. So for devices, does anyone have any questions? You can unmute or put in the chat, up to you. All right. So for this project, we're going to be shooting 10 photos, 3 photos of the 3 types of balance. So 3 photos of symmetrical balance, 3 photos of asymmetrical balance, 3 of radial balance, all right? So what we need to do is to make sure we're shooting the right stuff, right? So for examples, I put a link here, examples of balance types. So it's a quick 3-minute video on those 3 types of balance. So she gives some different examples. So I'm just going to play that real quick.
Today we're going to go over symmetry and how to use that in a work of art. So symmetry is what occurs when one side of something balances out or mirrors the other. It is used in art, it can be used in street signs, and we can also see it within architecture around the world. And this creates a sense of harmonious balance. If you were to draw a midline from the top of your forehead, down the middle of your nose, over your lips, and to the bottom of your chin, you could see that your eyes, your ears, your nostrils all mirror each other on either side of the line. That's what we call symmetry. In a piece of art, symmetry is present in much of the same way when the elements within balance each other. An excellent example of a symmetrical piece is Leonardo's The Last Supper. This painting can be split directly down the middle where Christ sits. The table on each side is of equal lengths, and the sizes and placement of the windows in the back mirror one another as well. The openings on each side of the walls are not only the same in size, but in number and perspective angle as well. And although Christ's apostles are in different positions, they are divided equally on each side, 6 to the left and 6 to the right. There are 3 different types of balance. Symmetrical, as we have discussed, then there's radial, and then of course asymmetrical design. So let's talk about radial balance. Radial balance are lines or shapes that radiate outward from a central point in a circular fashion. Good examples of this are rose windows. These are found in churches of the Gothic architectural style that were divided into segments by stone mullions and designs. The name rose window was not used before the 17th century and comes from the English flower name, the rose. Another example is the mandalas. This is a spiritual and ritual symbol in Hinduism and Buddhism, representing the universe. These designs, like the rose windows, create a pattern around a central axis, once again creating a radial design. Lastly, we have asymmetrical design. This balance refers to a design that has dissimilar elements but still appears balanced. Dividing a picture in half won't have the exact same elements. However, the elements they do have are varied and seem to balance one another out. There is still careful planning and thought into the placement of objects. They are not randomly placed. They are either balanced with color, line, size, or shapes. So whether you are using a symmetrical composition, a radial design, or an asymmetrical layout, your pieces should give off a feeling of harmonious balance and movement.
Cool. It's a good little video on balance. And so the whole idea is, how do we shoot for balance, right? So what I do recommend doing is, if you do a quick search like radial balance photography, you will see different examples of radial balance. So maybe you have, succulents or flowers in your backyard, or you can go to a park. Maybe you can find objects with radial balance, like this is a cracked window. So think of like a spider web, has that radial balance. Let's see if I can find one here. There we go. So spider web has, usually a central point, sometimes where the spider is, and then those little web that kind of shoot out from that central point. So make sure you can still see the central point, radial balance. Think about our citrus fruits, like a grapefruit or orange or lime or lemon. There's those little segments and kind of a center section here. That is radial balance, right? Then think about, spokes on a bicycle. Typically has a center point, and then the spokes that radiate out from that central point. Or maybe you're looking around the house and you got, objects that have, radial balance in them. For, I'd say radial balance might be the hardest one to find stuff. Next one is symmetrical balance. So if we search symmetrical balance photography, do an image search, what are places or areas or objects that have symmetry, right? As she mentioned, a picture of a person generally have two eyebrows, two eyes, everything is pretty symmetrical on a face. So you could take someone's picture or your own picture if you wanted to, or someone in a symmetrical pose. You could go to a place with a symmetrical, layout or design. Right, the train tracks, pretty symmetrical. Corner of a building, pretty symmetrical. Certain architecture, obviously not going to shoot the Taj Mahal, but there are architectures too in San Diego that are very symmetrical. And so just think about what are objects that have equal on each side. It doesn't have to be big objects, it could also be little objects. And so, like even my headphones are symmetrical, right? If I cut this in half, right, it would be pretty symmetrical on each half. So you could have objects around your house that have symmetry. So maybe you just might need to get really close and just shoot like a little section of something. Like you don't have to shoot the whole thing. Like maybe the whole object is in symmetry, but even this little earbuds holder, if I cut that in half, is very symmetrical. So maybe you just need to shoot a really close-up shot of it. And so think of items or places that have symmetry. Even like a window, right, usually are symmetrical. And then lastly, the hardest one for students to kind of get is asymmetrical balance. So asymmetrical balance photography is all about balance, just basically paying attention to, like, do you have two focal points in your scene, right? And balance of unlike objects. So this scene we have, focal point of the dad and the kid. And then the other side, we got the rocks that stand out, right? This one, we got a focal point of the stick in the foreground and then the factory in the background. Both are focal points, and if I cut this diagonally, it would be pretty balanced. Even using the sun, so maybe you have the sun on one side and an object on the other side. Those are two different focal points. You could also, as Emma mentioned, make a still life. You could arrange things in an asymmetrical way, right? You could have one object on one side, different objects on the other side. Like this one with the cat. So we got the cat and the cat in the jar. This is a good example here. Like maybe you see a focal point object here and another focal point, right? And that creates a nice asymmetrical balance. So again, you could arrange things, in an interesting way at home if you can't go outside, or maybe you find objects that have asymmetry, or maybe you just find two focal points. So you got a focal point here and a focal point there, right? And so just kind of paying attention to, what's around, and do you have kind of two focal points. So this one, pretty cute, got the two birds. One's puffing up, one's not, right? If you divide in the half, pretty asymmetrical. And if you like getting outside, you could find a tree with the sun or a person with the sun and just kind of put one on one side, one on the other side. Again, you could arrange things asymmetrically too. So, any questions on those three types of balance? So symmetrical, asymmetrical, and radial. You're going to take 3 photos of each. The last photo will be your self-portrait. And so this just kind of helps me see, what you guys look like. And also, you guys tend to care more about your self-portrait than other photos because you want to make sure you look nice. And so just try to find some nice soft lighting. If I was doing this at home and I could only shoot indoors, I would wait till it's sunny and then get next to a window and have this kind of soft window light, diffuse light coming in. Or if I had a place with like open shade, I could just shoot against a clean wall. That's easy. Or maybe even like a doorway, in your room or house and just like a clean background. That's a nice portrait. And typically a portrait is about mid-chest with a little bit of headroom. It's usually a vertical frame. So again, you can shoot it vertically. Some of you might have the iPhone with the portrait mode where you can blur out the background. That's cool too. And what I'm just looking for is just kind of nice, even lighting on your face. So you can shoot it indoors, outdoors, totally up to you and what you and your parents feel comfortable with. All right, I'm gonna stop the recording.